So as well-being has many different stages, what we're going to look at is 5 different levels, you could say, on the progression up the basic event-based well-being model all the way up to the experience of enlightenment. We'll spend a little bit of time on 5 different levels, you could say, that might work. So level 1, which I call, say, the pre-state or conventional sense of self, is that classic model, which is where if the event goes well, I feel great. If it doesn't, I don't. And I have different ways to manage that. I either change the event or I change my thoughts about the event and reframe it. So if I do manage to do that, there's no gap now between the event and what I would like. And so that's very what I would call cognitively driven well-being model. So the event goes certain way, I can adjust my thoughts, feelings, or sensations around that, and or I can adjust the event. Either way, I can feel a bit better. So that's the classic first version, you could say. The second version that we could look at is where, say, with the arrival of mindfulness, is where we have now a chance to step back from those thoughts, feelings, and sensations and go, well, that's just a thought I'm having around this. It's just constructed, it came in from my own head. And I can step back and just observe that and possibly have some power around that event to not necessarily shape my world. Over time, that place can also be when you start to observe the thoughts and the feelings and the sensations as passing mental events, perhaps. There's not only is there a lot of, say, neuroscience now around what that does, it frees up attentional resources for people because they're now not so ruminating, perhaps. That increases their performance anxiety if they are ruminating, but that can be reduced when they start to observe more naturally. So that's the second stage, you can almost say, that observation. The third stage is where one has a break from that normal sense of self that is doing that witnessing or observing. And there's a gap, in a sense, not just between thought, which is not just the silent mind, but even a gap of what we might call default or conventional sense of self or identity or ego. This can be called, an awakening moment or state. And it's dramatically different as an experience, essentially, because now there is not a me in a sense that observing, but there is obviously a consciousness, a sentience that is aware, but it's not from a single point. It's just awareness, you could say, that typically then closes, and then you're back to that normal sense of self. So then we go to perhaps the fourth level, which is where those events that start to happen have over time become increasingly more and more sort of frequent. They've increased in frequency, duration for how long they occur, those non-self events. And they start to join up more and more until eventually that then becomes the default sense of self almost drops away. This is after many experiences or many years of training or discipline, if you like, or simply those events. And eventually that just now becomes the default place where it's not a sense of self, but more just an absorption in life, in all things. There's no sense of separation. Of course, there's a much sort of freedom that comes with that. In a sense, they're now not a self that can be constrained either, which then brings a certain, you could almost say, liberal approach, but it can be very rule-based. It's really independent of all of that. The final stage, that last sort of description, is typically an extremely long duration, and for most, this last stage doesn't issue in, but it's the final perfected stage that you could call where enlightenment, full enlightenment, perfected enlightenment, which is where now not only is that sense of self that's watching and is free and open and lives its life that way, but all the things that were moving through it, you could say the past residual psychological phenomena, have completely been eliminated. And now this is the perfected state, complete control over matter and all phenomena. And that's the final place of the perfected enlightenment.